It starts with one thought, but not really. Everything is echoing, bouncing, rebounding, so many thoughts happening at once. There are floating particles in the sea of your brain, and you can only catch so many in your net of consciousness. You know the others are there, and yet you can't quite seem to grasp them. Sometimes you manage to glimpse them for a split second, and then they disappear. Sometimes you grab them and they fall away right as you are pulling them to you. This net only captures so much, and it doesn't always hold on to what it gets. And these thoughts, there's too many. You can't say them all, and in your rush to remember them, you forget others, turning away to focus on one, looking back and realizing they're gone, and then the other one disappears, and you are left with too many thoughts, and yet somehow not enough. Too many ideas, none of which you are able to vocalize. Your brain works ahead of itself, faster than you can think, and yet somehow they're there. Murky images of what could be lurk in your peripheral vision, and the more you try to grab hold, the more they scatter and overlap and shrink. If you don't speak these words, they're gone, and as you speak one, the others fly out of reach. Sometimes there's still an impression of where they were, nagging at you. You know it was there, and you still can't find it. Other times it leaves no trace of its existence, forever lost to the void. And these thoughts are stuck at the bottleneck that is your voice, building and building and building and building until it's so overwhelming that you just stop. Hit a wall. You shoot, and yet somehow speed in front of the bullet. You are moving so fast, you are paralyzed. There's so much that there is nothing.
Hi, I'm Lara.
And I'm Anoushka.
And we're the co-hosts for the people we meet.
In this episode, we'll be analyzing the complexities and debunking myths about ADHD. Tune in to learn about what living with ADHD is like and how it affects various aspects of the body and mind.
What if everything you were taught about how to focus or stay organized was never the right way for you? For many, ADHD is a topic that's often misunderstood or reduced to stereotypes, being told to quote-unquote sit still, settle down, or get a hold of yourself. But for those who live with it, it's much more complex. From an impossibly messy room to chronic tardiness, and sometimes losing track of time, life can feel like a whirlwind, sometimes even unbearable. To get a first-hand perspective, I sat down with Kylie, a junior at St. Mary's College High School. Together, we dive into what ADHD looks like through the lens of a teenage girl, the nuances, the challenges, and the strategies that can help when you start to feel lost.
Listen closely to her story, and stick around, because we'll be learning more about ADHD through the clinical and familial perspective with Dylan Kirsch, a licensed marriage family therapist who shared his experience working with clients who have ADHD and as a father to a young son who also has ADHD.
So, today I'm talking with someone I actually met in kind of like a random, amazing way. And many people who don't know, it was through an Intrepid tour where we both visited Morocco with our families, and we both met each other, and then we met a bunch of amazing different families, amazing different people and teenagers our age. And so what's funny about this girl that I'm gonna introduce, we instantly clicked because we were literally the same age. We had the same younger brother who were the same age. Our moms are very similar. And so that was kind of wild. But what stuck to me was that how open she is about living with ADHD. And I realized I have so many questions. Not in a clinical way, but like, what is it actually like day to day? So that's what we're going to dive into. And so, Kylie, would you like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Kylie. I was a sophomore at Berkeley High, but next year I'm transferring for my junior year to St. Mary's College High School.
Okay, so we're going to just start with the first question that I have for you, Kylie. And that is, can you just tell me a little bit about your background? And when did you first find out you had ADHD, and how did that conversation happen?
Actually, it was like the end of first grade. I was at this really strict traditional Chinese immersion school, and their curriculum was just very rigid, and also it was a Montessori, and so, I had to do everything of my own accord. Like, looking back, that seems like a pretty good idea, but at the time it was really not working because I could find zero motivation to do the work. And so I'd constantly be getting sent to like the office, or like my parents looked into it, and as it turns out, I have ADHD, and so does my mom because it's genetic.
And so, do you remember like the different tests you had to do, or like any sort of like questions that people had when that happened?
I was like 7 at the time, and so I think a lot of the questions were asked to my parents and also my teachers based on my performance in school. And so now people might ask me stuff like, do you stim? Do you like zone out all the time, etc.? But people never really asked me personally when I was first getting my diagnosis.
And so, how would you describe what it's like to live with ADHD?
I think one of the biggest things is, I mean, everyone already knows that there's the whole inattentive part, but I feel like it's a lot of skipping from thing to thing, and there's a lot of association. So like, if we're talking about something and there's like one little mention, it doesn't even have to be a direct reference to something, but if it reminds me of it, I often, my brain will go off on this tangent. Like when I hear a line that sounds like a song, or like it sounds like this iconic line from like a movie, and my brain will go off like thinking all about that while everyone else is still in the conversation, and then they'll ask me a question, I'll be like, huh, what? And it's a lot of meandering.
That's actually really interesting, because I was just gonna say, when someone asks me, like, what is ADHD, I feel like a lot of the notions that I think about as someone who doesn't have the knowledge of someone who maybe has ADHD is that it's really hard for them to pay attention. They're unfocused, and, easily they're able to get their mind off things into a different topic. And another thing that I've seen is that they need to be moving, like, they're moving a lot, so it's really hard for them to sit still, stay on task. So would you say those ideas are true in a way?
So I think sometimes it's true, but one of the most common misconceptions about ADHD is that you can't focus, period. Because, I mean, this myth has been kind of debunked lately, and awareness is spreading about the fact that it's wrong, but like, there are definitely things that I can focus on, and there's 100% things that other people with ADHD can focus on. It really depends on your level of interest in the subject. And sometimes it's literally just a random hyperfixation. Like a few Christmases ago, I learned how to crochet a hat, and I crocheted 3 hats in like a single day. And I got all this stuff to do that, and it's sitting in this drawer next to my desk. And that was from 2 years ago. Because I forgot all about it. But my point is, it's not that we can't focus. It's specific things that we occasionally can't focus on. And if it's remotely uninteresting, our brains immediately go off. I think a lot of people will think that ADHDers can be kind of rude because they're constantly like interrupting, or they say something completely out of the blue that is absolutely off topic. And that's because, again, as I was talking about, the whole going off on your own train of thought and bringing it back into the conversation. And so my brain is going so fast. I don't stim as much. People have actually accused me of not having ADHD because I don't really have that hyperactivity part of it. It's more that my brain is going off in so many different directions. And as I was saying before, I forget what I was going to say because I'm thinking about other subjects as well. So when I was first diagnosed, they just called it ADD for me because, again, I don't really have the hyperactivity part. But recently people have realized that ADHD is one big thing, and there's like 2 categories. There's the hyperactivity part, and then there's the inattentiveness. Obviously some people have both, which sucks. But yeah, I'm mostly the inattentive type, where I'm just so off in my head that I can't listen to what's happening.
So that is actually so interesting, because one thing that I learned was that girls are actually more likely to be undiagnosed with ADHD than boys. And so what I read was that boys with ADHD often exhibit more of like an outward, hyperactive, and impulsive behavior, which I think they're just more readily noticed and diagnosed. But for girls, on the other hand, they may present more of inattentive symptoms such as difficulty focusing, forgetfulness, disorganization, which is often mistaken for other issues like anxiety or just simply being daydreamers. And a lot of people just say like, oh yeah, these girls they're just like ditzy, they're just lazy, or they're just emotional.
You know, we all know that generally the boys, in general, not even just ADHDers, but boys tend to be a bit more energetic than girls. And so as kids with ADHD, you kind of learn to, I wouldn't say assimilate, but like blend in with the group. And so when you're around other people that are mostly quiet, you're gonna probably learn to be a bit more quiet. And the guys, as they're around other people who are louder, they're also gonna do that. And because guys are so loud, they tend to also just be looked into more often, even if they don't have it. So actually, I think lately there's been a rise in false diagnoses for that reason. It's also sort of why, you know, you'll hear people talking about, oh, ADHD is a trend, da 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 da. You know, it's not. It's a real condition. It's like an actual thing. It's a learning difference. It's not just something people are saying to get attention. It's actually a problem. Well, occasionally. And it can affect people. Girls tend to exhibit their symptoms, like you were saying, in sort of quieter ways. And, you know, maybe their stims aren't as visible. So like I've sort of been uncapping this pen and recapping it most of this time. Whereas, you know, sometimes you'll see people with big loud stims and like vocal stims. Actually, I do that a lot, you know, etc. You know, that's just what I do. Other people obviously have different ways of doing it, but yeah.
That's actually very important because, you know, there's some kids that I'm going to be honest, sometimes I think about and I really do think about, I'm like, oh, do they really have ADHD? And I think it's really important that you brought that up because, for example, like AP testing or just testing in general. I think I remember for AP testing for the AP European test or for our AP seminar, which is like an English AP class, they always get a time and a half for everything. And so I do think at the same time people are like, oh my gosh, they get the extra time, like lucky. But what exactly do you have to say to those people when they're like, oh my gosh, it's so unfair that they get all these like perks for test taking? Like, what exactly do you have to say on that?
Well, most of the time, I mean, first off, to get those accommodations, you need to apply for a 504 plan, which is, I mean, it's not super hard to do, but it's also not easy. And honestly, I don't have one because I literally have never gotten around to it. And for that reason, I panicked in the middle of the AP test. And, well, anyways, we're not going to talk about that. But here's one of the things that I think makes a really bad name for people with ADHD is those who abuse their plans. So like kids who are just reaping the benefits of their plans because they have ADHD. Like having ADHD and having a plan, that's great. But too often people use it as an excuse to just get by everything. And when other people see that, they think that just means, oh, if we give them all plans, then they'll all do this. And those kind of people, not the people who assume, but the people who are doing it in the first place, they really frustrate me because they make it so much harder for everyone else who also needs it.
I know you mentioned that some people assume like, oh, like you don't have it, you're just faking it. But then again, like you're saying that people are they're just taking the benefits. And then like not like, although it might be annoying for people who don't have it, they're like, oh, this like they're just getting benefits. For people who actually need it, they might not be able to get it because of this behavior.
Yeah.
And has this happened a lot in your school?
Well, because it's Berkeley, there's a lot of people with plans that they probably don't need. And then a lot of the people who actually do have it never get around to getting a plan.
I would say, yeah, because I would say like both of our schools, because we live in the Bay Area, it's like really competitive. So I could sometimes see people being like, okay, like I'm gonna want to get all like the benefits I can.
And it's not necessarily like an inability to get the plan. I bet you if I applied for one, I probably could. But Berkeley has a lot of availability for plans like that, but then if you don't have it, and if you don't have the plan but you still have ADHD and you tell them that, then they think if you don't have the plan, sometimes they're less likely to believe that your ADHD is an actual problem. But yeah, it cost me some A's this year.
No, I think that's actually very well said. And I think that addresses a lot of the assumptions that people have. And so that brings me back. Are there any common myths or assumptions about ADHD that you just wish people better understood?
There's a lot of misconceptions about stimming, like I was saying, or I guess fidgeting is what some people would call it, but that's the more physical side of it. Because a lot of people think that the only thing that there is to ADHD is you don't listen and you are constantly moving about. And that's sometimes not what's happening. There's other types of stims aside from twiddling your thumbs, snapping your fingers, etc. But also, sometimes when you're spaced out, then I'm not sure if this is like an official thing, but I feel like I could kind of categorize part of my thinking as stimming. I do feel like oftentimes I have like several voices in my head, and it's not necessarily that they're overlapping, but it's that they're all on different subjects, and I forget which ones are which sometimes.
So, are there certain environments, like maybe noisy rooms or long lectures, that just make things harder, to be yourself?
I think it definitely depends on like the day, because sometimes I'm doing better than others, and sometimes if I'm tired I can't like manage. But yeah, especially like long boring lectures, I had a lot of trouble with that in chemistry last year, because all of the info is like shot at you in like a 30-minute to an hour long lecture, and you're supposed to just retain this. And here's a horrible thing is sometimes when I'm finally like actually managing to listen, I'll realize that I'm actually doing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, no way. I'm understanding all of this. That's crazy. And then I realize, oh wait, I just went off in my brain and I missed like half the info I was supposed to take in. It's horrible. I gotta say that's probably the most annoying one, is when you think you're succeeding and just thinking about succeeding makes you fail. And noisy rooms sometimes. It probably depends on the person, but for me, long boring stuff is a lot harder to focus on than doing something in a noisy room. Because, for example, I'm reasonably good at math, and so my math classroom last year was always pretty noisy. But if it's something that I feel like I'm good at, that I am feeling like I'm succeeding at, then I can actually tune stuff out. And you'll probably hear stuff about like hyperfocus, which is, when you're in the state of tunnel vision with this one task that you're doing that you're so into, then you don't really hear stuff outside. Or sometimes I will hear it, and then it's like when you're sleeping and you're like half awake and you hear someone speaking to you like awake and telling you to get up, and you're like, okay, 1 second, and you close your eyes again and you forget that ever happened.
What kinds of strategies help you stay focused or organized?
Okay, so focus is one thing. I'm just going to say that organization is a completely different thing. And honestly, I'm more capable of focusing than I am of consistently organizing.
Okay, no, just keep in mind, my room is a mess.
Yeah, you can't see my room right now, but there's clothes strewn across the bed, But I actually did my independent project in 8th grade about ADHD, or rather how to change my room so that it was a better space for me to focus in. I'm not sure it helps all that much, but just making sure that things around you aren't standing out and easily catching your attention is definitely one thing to help stay focused. I benefit from music a lot. Sometimes it hurts more than helps, but other times it really helps block everything out, especially if it's like stuff that I know really well. If you're in sync with it enough, then you don't really pay attention to it, because although I do kind of have that like inner monologue that sings along, but it blocks the things that would otherwise be distractions out. Organization is an interesting subject because I've tried so many different strategies to stay organized, and I think people are always like, oh, you need to find a routine, you need to have a check. And I've tried so many times. I cannot keep a stable routine, which is so bad. Although one of the things I struggle with, and I know a lot of other people with ADHD struggle with this, getting up when your alarm goes off instead of just having like several different alarms
Oh
and
my god, that
snoozes.
is. I have like 10 different alarms, like every like 5 minutes, like boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Because I can never get up on that one alarm.
So my desk has a charger on it, and so I just charge my phone on my desk, which is across the room from my bed. Then when my alarm goes off, I'm sprinting out of bed, which keep in mind is the upper bunk, and so I'm like flying down the ladder. I can imagine if someone filmed it, it would be pretty funny. But here's another thing is, if you have like a reminder set up, you have to change its location so that it's out of place so that you see it. Because if you keep it in the same place for too long, like even just 2 or 3 days, you get so used to the sight of it being there that you don't check it. And so like sometimes if I don't like have a notebook or something, and I'm trying to remember something and it's like late at night, I'm not sure if other people do this, but I'll like attach like a thought to like a physical object. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but like I'll associate this one physical object with this one thing that I have to do. So like I have this like cat pillow. I'm like, oh, in the morning I have to take out the trash, and I will move the pillow out of where it should be. And so in the morning when I see that it's not there, I'm like, oh, that's not there. That means I have to remember something. And it's not the most foolproof method because sometimes I'll forget what I'm trying to remember, but at the very least I know that I have something to do.
Okay, this is like such a bad way to say this, but another person who might not have ADHD, they might also deal with all the same things that you have. Like for example, I have such a hard time waking up and I need like 10 different alarms, or sometimes like it's so bad that I've like completely like missed my alarm, and maybe it could just be because it's in the same place, but I think those strategies could really, really help.
On that note, I actually remembered one of the misconception thingies, like what you were saying. A lot of the things that ADHD people experience are really similar to what regular people feel sometimes. And I think that some people think that that means that ADHD must just not exist because it's similar to that. But in reality, I mean, partially it depends on like the accumulation of stuff. All of that comes together at once, and it's like several different symptoms, or it's like the extent to which the symptoms grow. So, you're doing your work, there's a loud thing, you're like, oh gosh, what is that? You're like getting distracted for a bit, right? And maybe you go and look out the window to see what it is, and then you're like, okay, and you come back and you find a solution to like ignore it, right? But I personally, I'll hear a loud noise, I'll be like, oh, what is that? And then I'll go through like a list of possible things. Look out the window. Maybe I'll even go down the street to find it. That's not like the best like actual real world example, but like it's kind of a good metaphor just for like in terms of how hard stuff hits.
Wait, no, I think that's like very well said. Like I can understand it. And so, have you ever like frustrated or misunderstood because of ADHD?
Here's a crazy story is I've actually felt that way with other people who also have ADHD because, I have ADHD. Obviously, it's not like the strongest that it could ever be. And when you're around other people who have stronger ADHD than I feel almost I don't deserve a diagnosis when there's someone who has it worse than me. And I know like almost everyone can relate to that idea, like the sort of imposter syndrome, But there were these 2 kids last year who were talking about how ADHD is the same as neurotypicality. It's not neurodivergent. It's neurotypicality because it's a spectrum, which yes, that is correct. It is a spectrum, but that does not make it neurotypical because that would also mean that literally any kind of mental difference would be that way. Like autism is a spectrum. When you hear people say on the spectrum, that often is talking about and referring to autism. And yet these kids were like, oh, well, since it's a spectrum and everyone has a little bit of ADHD, which isn't true, then therefore it must be neurotypical. The really ironic part, though, is that these two they both were like heavily ADHD, heavily leaning on the hyperactivity side. And they literally told me to my face that they had decided that I didn't have ADHD because I, quote, didn't stim, which, first off, again, wasn't true. I did stim. It was just like a quieter, or, I mean, not necessarily quieter, but less noticeable action. And they told me that I had bad work habits. And, you know, that's kind of the worst thing you can possibly tell someone with ADHD, is that it's just their personality that's making them struggle with these things. It's like discrediting their experience. It's saying that, no, what you've seen is actually just you being like really bad at this. It's telling them that the stuff that they experience is real. It's not in their head. It's not them just being bad at stuff. Sometimes it's giving them the tools to work forwards, but it's also telling them that they're not alone, that this isn't necessarily their fault. And so, you know, to tell someone who definitely has a diagnosis, or even if they don't have a diagnosis, but to tell someone like that they literally don't have it and it's just completely their fault, is sort of, I mean, it's mean, obviously.
It's messed up, okay?
It's messed up, and it's kind of the worst thing you can do to like someone's morale, is to tell them that all these things that they can't control are their fault.
I just cannot believe that happened to you, especially when someone just outwardly tells you that what you're experiencing is not real. And so, do you feel like ADHD has ever affected your confidence or how you see yourself?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about a bit without diagnosis and with. So, like, without it, you know, I'm going to talk a bit about my mom's experience, but she's always kind of felt sort of alone because she's had all these experiences and she's had to fight through them without any accommodations whatsoever, any validation. Me, as a kid who was diagnosed pretty early, and also, you know, now on social media, there's all of these things circulating from people who have it. It's cool to know that other people share your experience, to know that it's just more proof that it's not your fault, as much as you do have to sometimes fight it to get good grades and other things like that. So it's probably affected my confidence in that my grades I've struggled to complete everything that I get, or like sometimes I'm like, so yeah, it's affected my confidence. Not as much as it has affected people who haven't had that validation, but it definitely has.
I mean, for experience, especially with turning homework in, turning all these assignments, or just getting things done, do you ever feel like teachers, they validate your experience or like who you or how you are, or you don't think so?
Well, Berkeley is definitely progressive enough that the teachers are welcoming and they know how to handle it better. And a lot of the teachers have been great with helping me and reminding me to complete stuff. Although I'll admit that sometimes if a reminder comes at the wrong time or from the wrong person, as with most teenagers, kind of turns you off the subject as much as we need that reminder.
You know, what's actually very interesting that I researched, and this was actually from a Harvard psychologist. His name is Edward Hallowell, and he's an ADHD expert. And what he found was that there are actually, like, they're not all great, but there are benefits to having ADHD. Like, some people are more creative, spontaneous, quick thinking, and resilient. And so, what do you have to say on that? Just like thinking about, like, you know, ADHD is not all bad. Like, there's also great things about it.
Yeah, so it definitely has benefits, as I was talking about the hyperfocus and, like you mentioned, extra creativity. And also what I've seen is there's a lot of pattern noticing. Like, apparently we're more likely to notice little patterns, and it makes us really good at predicting the outcomes, especially stories. Like when I'm watching like a movie or something, there's like an 80% chance that I'll guess who's gonna end up being like the mole. I'm kind of rarely wrong about like murder mysteries because it's not necessarily a pattern in the story. I mean, you can also notice it in the singular story, but also in a lot of literature and media, there's like a certain type of character who always ends up being the bad guy. They're not quite a background character, but they're not quite like a supporting role. They're sort of in the middle, so they're noticeable, so that they're a character, but they're not like outwards enough for them to necessarily become a suspect. But yeah, so that's just an example of one of the patterns that I use in like everyday life. It does make me a bit paranoid. So, something I want to talk about was masking. Lots of people have probably heard of it by now, but the idea that you change how much of your personality or what your personality is when you're around certain people and what they see and how they perceive you. It's definitely something I think about all the time. But my mom pointed out that it can actually be a real advantage to know how to blend in wherever you are. It's definitely exhausting, and so a lot of people have talked about, especially online, you'll see people talking about that one friend they can quote unmask with, just like the idea that you can be your authentic self with certain people. And as a kid, I would pick and choose how much of silliness or like seriousness people already censor themselves, but I realized that a lot of the censorship that I was doing on my own thoughts and on my own commentary, depending who I was around, that wasn't just stuff that regular people do. I only realized looking back recently that was me masking without realizing that's what I was doing.
No, wait, that's actually I didn't like, by the way, this whole thing I'm learning a lot myself, and I just think that it's that having someone like you who's gone through you have your own experience, it just like opens eyes for a lot of people, especially like people maybe like me or people who just don't know about ADHD. So I wanted to ask, what's something you wish more teens or adults understood about ADHD?
One of the overarching themes is recognizing that a lot of these experiences are specific to individuals. Like what I am personally describing of my personal experience, completely and utterly different from someone else with ADHD, because it affects different people in different ways. And so often people think that it's just a few specific symptoms that mean that you have ADHD, when really it depends on the person. And it also depends how much of it you see, because there's a lot going on under the surface with like how fast your brain is working, with how much you're thinking about, with what you're thinking about. And then there's again the stuff that you do see. There's the stimming, there's the stuff you hear. The loudness, apparently a symptom of ADHD that a lot of people don't realize, is emotional regulation and not temperature, volume regulation. A lot of the stuff that we react to things is usually very, again, not necessarily loud, but strong. So, strong reactions. Rejection sensitivity, in terms of how we process things, there's rejection sensitivity disorder. It's like the smallest little rejections to like who you are, what you're doing, or literally anything hit like really strongly to a lot of people with ADHD. Like a lot of things are taken like extremely personally, even if it isn't meant to. Like maybe someone made an offhanded comment about like how my hair was like stupid or something. And well, it has to be something I believe. I personally don't believe that my hair is stupid. I like my hair. But here's a good example. If someone told me that I'm annoying and I chatter too much, I just ramble and then I always forget everything I'm doing. Personally, that would probably keep echoing in my head for a very long time, and because I'm not completely sure why, but personally I feel like it would be because I feel like that hits so close to home and that is me, and then I'm constantly worried about, wait, is that what I'm doing? Am I scaring everyone off because I'm so annoying? Stuff like that. Even if it was just like a joke, it could be literally just a random little thing to make fun of me just because it was funny and it wasn't supposed to be deep. And people are always telling us, well, me especially, it's not that deep. People love saying that when they make jokes, and I personally, I hate that when that happens because I take everything either too seriously or too light.
No, but I feel like just in general, with just in general, like depending on who you are, like even for me, I don't really love people joking about myself. And so I don't think I feel like it's just like it shouldn't be like bad on your part that you don't like people talking about you, because in the end no one really enjoys that. So I don't think and they say like, yeah, it's not that deep, but then how would you feel like if someone was making fun of you the same way?
Yeah, that's always a really annoying way to get out of joking. A lot of these things that people are just randomly saying, they don't realize how seriously it's taken sometimes, and they think you're often being like babyish and just overreacting because your feelings get hurt too easily. And I mean, that's sort of true, but like it's not just that we're sensitive because our personality is just weak. It's like an actual thing. And then the other thing is audio processing disorder. So I was talking about symptoms of this, like where I literally couldn't process what was like coming out of my teacher's mouth, just because not only if it's uninteresting, even sometimes when it's is actually interesting, it's just one little slip and you're out of the zone of what they're saying, and you can't understand. It doesn't compute in your brain what the words putting together, what they mean. I think that's also why subtitles help, because when you both hear it and you see it, it's easier to process. So that's part of what's behind like the zoning out, is like the literal inability to understand the combinations of words. It's almost kind of funny. It sounds like verbal dyslexia or auditory dyslexia. Another thing was that a lot of ADHDers, what we struggle with is it's not necessarily that we have an inability to do something, but it's like turning on a light switch. It's like you flick up and it's on, you flick down and it's off. It's completely on, it's completely off. Other people are able to do that thing where they bring it up gradually, or where they're able to pick exactly how much intensity it has. But with us, it's either all or nothing.
No, I think I just don't know how to put into words how many there I feel like there's just so many different components to someone who has ADHD. And so I do think that for a lot of people it can just be like disappointing when it's just like when they just like assume things, when there's like a stereotype, or when they just have some preconceived notions about you. And then I do think that it's just hard to navigate yourself right now, in the world that we live in right now. But I do want to pivot to one of the last questions that I have, is that if someone just got diagnosed or was maybe feeling overwhelmed, what is something that you would want to say to them, or some advice that you wish that you knew when you were younger?
I'd say, first off, a lot of people get diagnosed and they think that it makes them lesser somehow, but it really doesn't. As we were talking about, there are definitely benefits to having it, but there's things that you'll struggle with, and a lot of the time that isn't your fault. Obviously, you have to try and work alongside it and push through, but to a certain point, there's only so much you can do, and just know that you're not alone. Other people have this experience as well. It's not just you. Also, some people love to talk about how ADHD is a superpower, and I'm not saying that it isn't, but I feel like also only saying that isn't acknowledging the fact that it does actually negatively affect people as well. If someone says that to you, you can acknowledge that, but them saying that does not mean that you should be completely fine all the time. You're allowed to struggle.
Yeah, it's like, I think so. Like, one thing that I noticed throughout this whole conversation that we have is that it's okay to say that you're not doing fine, and it's okay to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And people silencing you does not mean like they're in the right, you know. Like, just like anyone, ADHD or not, you should be able to tell how you feel and advocate for yourself. Well, Kylie, I want to thank you so much for having this conversation. I've learned so much, and it really means a lot to me that you.
It's been nice to like reiterate all these thoughts and put them into like actual words that I hope make sense. Thanks for having me.
That was Kylie, sharing her experience as a teenage girl and student with ADHD. Her story of resilience and adaptability is one many of us can take inspiration from. Next, we sat down with Dr. Dylan Kirsch to ask him some questions and debunk some myths about how ADHD works and how it can affect individuals.
Currently licensed marriage and family therapist, but my first career was as a public school teacher, educator. So I have a master's in education as well. So I guess that kind of does make me a really uniquely qualified guest for somebody to talk about the intersection between public education and ADHD and mental health. So yeah, my first career, I taught in Oakland, middle school. I taught in Hawaii in high school, and then I came back, taught some middle and high school here in Marin County, in the East Bay, and what have you. So I've navigated the public school system and the IEP 504 plans with dealing with people with learning differences. And now I've spent the last 13 years working in mental health as a therapist in lots of different environments. And interestingly, there was a period of time where my job was a TheraTutor, which was a term I kind of made it up, or somebody made it up for me. But there was a period of time where I just had to kind of hustle and support myself before I was really able to charge. I wasn't really like a licensed therapist, so I couldn't really charge enough to support myself as a therapist, but I couldn't work full-time as a teacher because I had to get my hours as a therapist. So a lot of my clients were tutoring clients, but I would market myself as someone who had all this mental health training and could specialize and work with people with ADHD or kids with depression or other mental health challenges. And so I could charge a little bit more than a regular tutor. And so I got to work a lot with kids with ADHD at both helping them academically and helping them with their mental health stuff and how to navigate their ADHD and a lot of the mental health challenges, the depression and anxiety that can come along with that as a result of just learning being different at that age and having to navigate those challenges. And really a lot of what comes along with it is when you feel different, especially in those middle school years, you're going to have to deal with some depression and anxiety as well. So yeah, that's pretty much my professional career. Teacher and now therapist.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Lara, do you want to end with the first questions?
Yeah, of course. So, I guess our first question is that you've mentioned a lot that you've worked extensively with boys in ADHD. We interviewed a 16-year-old girl. So what are the common differences you noticed between how ADHD is present in boys versus girls?
Yeah, so it's interesting because in reality, the way that ADHD manifests or actually functions in the brain isn't different, right? But how it presents, it can be very different. I mean, I think a lot of it just comes down to gender roles early on. A lot of the common, especially with the ADHD, the hyperactive part, boys are kind of told that that's what boys are at a young age, and it's kind of encouraged. Oh, boys are hyper. Oh, yeah, he's just being a boy. And so it's almost when a boy acts that way, especially even in a school setting, they're not told to turn it down. There's no shame involved in what have you. With a girl, often, especially in America, it's when you're acting hyper and you're acting extra, especially physically. A lot of times, and a lot of it's we don't act that way. You're not acting lady. Tone it down. We don't act that way. And so there's a lot of shame built in. So I think a lot of girls learn to just shut it down. We don't act that way. We don't act hyper. I just keep myself contained. And so when you get to school, a lot of times women, girls with ADHD have already kind of trained themselves to not present those traits of ADHD. So it's so much harder to notice and diagnose in girls because they're already just shut it down. Whereas boys have almost learned to play it up a lot of the time. And so the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Boys are going to get diagnosed more often. They're easier to spot because physically they're going to be moving around more often. They don't care. They don't mind getting in trouble. A lot of boys kind of get the attention of getting in trouble. And sometimes it makes them cool and popular in school to be the class clown. It's a lot harder for a girl to pull that off. So in general, you're just not going to notice. It's really hard to diagnose. Especially, I mean, poor academic performance is the only real way. And it would be if a female student and you have a relationship with her and she's really intelligent and her grades aren't matching up and you actually take the time to explore that. What's going on here? I know you're super bright. Your grades aren't reflecting that. Let's go a little deeper. Let me get to know you. Okay, now let's actually assess you. Let's actually give you some proper assessments and tests that will actually suss out what's going on here. And then we can see, okay, based on these assessments, we can see that it's ADHD that's the culprit here. And then we can get you that 504 plan or that IEP plan, the proper kind of support and resources to kind of help you bridge the gap.
Just as a follow-up question to that, I feel oftentimes people sort of perceive ADHD as a hyperactive kid bouncing around. But through our own research, we've also understood that it can present in multiple different things. For example, difficulty with organization or staying on task. What would you say are some of the more unseen qualities of ADHD that people don't often know about?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the stereotypical one because it's the most, the one that you can most easily notice and it's just easy to label. But I would say the ability to manage, to absorb a larger project, a larger task, and break it down on one's own. And organize it into smaller chunks and then prioritize those chunks and keep them straight. So if somebody said, you need to write this essay, it's due in a month, you have to choose one of these 3 questions and I'm like, cool. In my head, I'm like, all right, I got to do this, and I can just kind of start writing down and organizing. For somebody with ADHD, I don't have ADHD, so I don't know exactly how it works, but it just doesn't happen. It's just so overwhelming. And if someone's not gonna, in the beginning, if someone's not gonna sit with you and slowly show you how to take this giant behemoth of a thing and how to slowly, one step at a time, and develop a process in which you can break this thing down and chip away at it, it just is way too big. And so I think that in terms of what professionals, what we do to help people is help them develop a system where in school, when something comes across their plate, someone with ADHD's plate, they go, okay, I'm not going to freak out. I know I have my system. I might not be looking at this now, but I know I have one. Bring it back later, or I'll bring this to my tutor or whoever the person is, and I'll be able to take the time to kind of be okay. And there's some pretty tried and true ways to do it in terms of how to chunk things out, prioritize them. In this day and age, we have so many great digital resources and ways to keep things organized. But I would say that's far more what gets in the way academically than the activity. I mean, sure, it might be more difficult to want to sit in your chair for a full class period, or you might need to play with something in your hand, or you might be shaking your leg. But that stuff's it might be visible, but it doesn't really get into me academically. I think the organizational piece is probably the most challenging part with having ADHD.
I think that's very interesting that you mentioned that, especially because when I was speaking with Kylie, which was the interview that we had earlier, she was mentioning that because she goes to Berkeley High School, so it's a quite competitive school, she was saying that teachers, they don't rely really if someone were to tell them, I have ADHD, I don't think I can do this. They don't really believe you. They don't give you the accommodations. They were to say, I think teachers at her school, she was saying that if you want us to give you more time, if you want us to help you out, you need the 504 plan. If not, we're going to have to treat you the same as any other student. And so my question is, do you think schools, I guess, are doing enough to help maybe students who have ADHD and who don't have a 504 plan? Or do schools have some sort of program to determine if a student may have ADHD?
I mean, it's so case by case. So it really, unfortunately, it has to do with the resources that a school has. And we could get so far down the rabbit hole here in terms of institutionalized racism and I mean, just in terms of how property taxes fund schools, and we could do 20 podcasts about this. Certain schools, who is the superintendent and priorities of certain communities and all that. Certain schools make it a real priority to put resources towards kids with learning differences first and fund their resource programs and do a great job training their teachers, and really should be commended for training their teachers to differentiate lesson plans, to make sure that they're considering the kids in the class with IEPs and 504s, and not coming in saying, oh, most of these kids have these plans just to try to get over on the system. They're just trying to take advantage, and I'm not going to go out of my way for kids that don't have it, and I'm just trying to get out of here and retire as quick as I can. So each teacher's different, each district's different. I don't want to ever generalize about that. But I do think that absolutely there's schools that could do a lot better job of it. And so, unfortunately, I think the most important thing is educating parents in how to advocate for their kids, or even educating kids in how to tell their parents how to advocate for them, because the squeaky wheel does get the grease. And it's very possible in this day and age, if a kid were to listen to this podcast and say, yeah, I think I might have ADHD, man, I want help. And they go to their parents and say, hey, can you help me advocate for myself? Let's go to that's the first thing you do, is you have to go to the district and say, hey, I want to be assessed. I want to be tested. And you have to figure out what is the proper way to do that, right? How do you officially request that? It's not rocket science. You can probably find it on the website, but you got to do it. And the parent has to initiate it usually. And then sometimes you have to push, right, to make sure that it goes through. And then you have to follow up. And then based on those results, you have to make sure you then advocate to get the resources that you deserve. And if certain districts are infamous for being really cheap and trying to fight tooth and nail to not give resources because they don't want to spend the money. Others have the money and they have more of a program of we're really wanting to help kids, in which case there's actually other great public programs out there where they have attorneys that actually work on contingency to help you fight the district for free of charge, and maybe they get some cut on the back end. I mean, there's all kinds of resources out there and programs if you dig and do the research and advocate for yourself. But unfortunately, the sad truth is if you just show up at school and have ADHD and don't know much about ADHD, and your parents don't know much about ADHD or other learning differences, and you just kind of exist and struggle, you're probably not going to get the resources you deserve. Unless you have a teacher that's really caring and on it and you develop a relationship with them and we need to get so-and-so assessed. So-and-so really obviously has some such and such going on. Because a teacher can initiate an assessment, mostly depending on the district. Or at least then that teacher could call the parents and say, there's clearly something going on with your kid. You need to call this number and request an assessment. And again, independent of how good a school is or a district is, that's just a caring teacher can make all the difference. There's not really an answer to your question in terms of yes or no.
I had a quick question about in terms of working with ADHD. So I know that there's medication, but there's also maybe certain tools that people with ADHD can use. What have you found to be one of the most effective tools to help manage ADHD with people you've worked with in your practice?
Yeah, so I mean, the medication question is a super tricky one, especially with kids, because the brain is developing. I mean, in boys until they're 25. Some of these stimulant medications are super powerful, and if it's diagnosis and it's medication, it can be a home run. But if it's the wrong one, you're basically giving meth and speed to a 13 or 14-year-old kid that doesn't need it.
Yeah.
You can do some permanent damage to a brain, so you got to be really careful. That being said, if we're talking about what are the best interventions, I would say really it's about developing systems, routines early on. And there's both, I think you guys, in some of the questions you sent me, I mean, there's kind of it's twofold. There's a physical part of it in terms of, especially I've noticed with boys, starting with your backpack. Some of the backpacks that I've seen, 6th grade boys over the years, the absolute rat's nest of a backpack. Sometimes you're oh my God, what is going on in here? Or in the home environment. So learning to have some semblance of organization and order kind of at home and then in the backpack, so that there's some ability to keep things straight. And then also having an organizational system in terms of assignments and what have you. So it's really what it comes down to, because there's no innate natural ability to do that. It's really, when I'm working with teens and preteens, that's what it's got to be. Is we got to start. Okay, what's our system here, and how are we supporting, maintaining that system? What adults and allies do you have to help do that? Because you actually do need people along the way on a daily basis, double checking the system with you. So is your backpack staying organized? We need it to. There needs to be a couple people along the day double checking with, is your desk organized the way we need it? Was there a parent there to double check that? And then in terms of your digital organization, we need things super streamlined. Really, you want, at the end of the day, someone to have one document that has what their to-do list is in terms of the academic things they need to be doing, that they've prioritized and ranked. So when they open it up, it doesn't have the giant, most important thing at the bottom, and they actually know what they need to do, and they've developed some type of organizational system. Maybe it's colors, or maybe the amount of time it takes to do something. There's a clear completed or not completed check mark, turned in or not turned in check mark. And they've just kind of developed this way to kind of compile, organize, and prioritize their tasks. And they have somebody who says, hey, let's take a look at that. Maybe they have some kind of tutor or parent or friend or some people in their lives that know about this, that are checking it with them on a regular basis, who are going over it with them and helping them to kind of keep it organized and so kind of helping them develop that program, teaching the adults in their lives how to use it with them. That would be the most valuable thing you could I think give a young person with ADHD.
Thank you. I'm just thinking I myself might need something like that.
Yeah, I mean it would. Yeah. Why not?
Laura, do you want to have any more points?
No, I was just going to ask, how do you think, I know you talked about specifically that for parents, it's there, or maybe even, I don't know, families, they have a very big role in people who have ADHD. So how can families best support a child who's struggling maybe with focused or self-esteem related to ADHD?
Yeah. Oh man, that one just hit me, because like I said, my son's just started TK, and he already has been diagnosed with ADHD, and it's so we've already had to do that, support him in his self-esteem. Yeah, my son got kicked out of preschool at 2.5 years old, because he couldn't kind of maintain, because of the hyperactivity piece, right? He just couldn't kind of do, we're going to sit in our little chairs now, and now we're going to draw in our little chairs for 20 minutes, and okay, everybody, now we're going to stand up and quietly walk over here, and now we're going to sit. The rigidity of that, the way ADHD manifests when you're 2 and 3 years old is different than when you're 13 and 14 years old. But I think psychologically, when you can't fit in, when you're not the square peg fitting in the square hole, no matter whether you're 2 or whether you're 12 or whether you're 16, and the other kids, whether they say it out loud and say you're a bad boy, or whether they give you a look, it's different when you're a 16-year-old girl and whether you're a 2-year-old boy. There's ways people communicate to you you're not fitting in. You're supposed to. And shame feels the same when you're 2 or whether you're. And shame is about the most toxic emotion that there is. Shame is there's something wrong with me. I'm bad. There's something in my core that's wrong. There's nothing worse for a person than shame. And so my son experienced shame at 2 or 3 years old because the other kids were saying stuff. And so we had to help him with, well, first of all, let's get him the heck out. Let's get him out of this environment ASAP, and reprogram him and make sure that he knows that, and let's be very explicit, right? Again, he's barely grasping the English language, but still, he doesn't quite understand ADHD. But if I had a kid that was in high school, I would say, this is this learning difference. It's not your fault. I imagine this is some of the messaging you're getting. You probably are feeling this way. And let's talk about it. Let's be really explicit about the feelings that might be coming up for you, how you're feeling different. Giving that kid space to talk about the experiences they might be having, some of the crappy things kids might be saying to them. Teachers may have said what it feels like to get bad grades, and then countering and making sure that I'm filling in the gaps and letting them see. Because the other thing, which we haven't gotten to yet, is kind of the whole paradigm of ADHD as a superpower, and the awesome, and I've seen it, and it's so cool to watch with my son, the awesome ability to get hyper-focused on something and get so into some one thing. And just in terms of, you brought up Anoushka earlier, before the podcast, we were talking about resilience and the importance of talking about resilience when we talk about mental health. And when we talk about the arc of mental health, and really those of us that have been through stuff, how much more amazing our lives can be because of the resilience we develop from getting through stuff. And so people with ADHD have the ability to go so much deeper, and just when they get into something, the end result of some of those projects and products can be way cooler than the average person. When they just find their little niche and they just go, it's really cool to watch. And so I think really leaning into it as a parent and then also finding what are those things that my kid is passionate about that are totally outside of school, and am I providing the resources for that? And then am I following up on that and making sure that I'm then saying, look what you did. How cool is that? And putting things in perspective too, right? I mean, and I guess that's what I'm saying about the counter. Is world history that important? You know what I mean? Is geometry that important? What matters about a person? Being a friend's important. Being a family member is important. Having a good heart, having passion's important. What's important? Is your GPA that important? I mean, it's important. Like having future's important. I'm not obviously think those are important, but what's really important? And taking your time out to have those conversations with your kids so that they know they're more important than their GPA.
Yeah, I think that that's incredibly empowering, not only for maybe people with ADHD, but people who maybe don't have it and just need to hear that, understanding what your different priorities are. And I think that another big part of what we wanted to ask you today, which you mentioned, was just sort of kind of the positives and highlights of ADHD potentially, and what are some traits that people can embrace. So in terms of specifics, do you see any positive traits in ADHD which you feel really deserve more recognition?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just totally went for it on that one. And that one's my favorite one. And I just, when my son, and I've seen it also in all ages, but it's really legit, an amazing superpower that I don't have. I wouldn't say I envy it, but maybe I do. I don't know, a little bit. It's something that when harnessed, I think the human race benefits from. And I think it applies with a lot of different mental health conditions. I think folks on the autism spectrum are able to do things and go places that many of us can't go, that provide the world with gifts that the human race wouldn't have otherwise. I I clearly advocate for folks with bipolar disorder to be on meds, but people on manic episodes have created some of the most amazing art in the world. I mean, there's almost every, depressed people have created some of the most amazing, some of the best songs I've ever heard in the world were depressed people. Some of the best poetry, I don't know. So I do think that, but yeah, there's probably others, but nothing's really coming to mind for me. But I do think there's also a certain energy that it's nice to have a person with ADHD. It's nice to have in a group. It's nice to have that energy. It can definitely just be a good somebody just bringing it. You know what I mean? Hey, brings up the energy of the group. Sometimes you need some motivation. You need somebody to be, let's go, guys. Come on, get up. Let's go. Let's move. Sometimes you just need somebody with some positive energy and some juice, and to just on a Monday to just say, let's go. I think every team needs somebody with ADHD on it for those reasons.
No, that was very well said. And so that kind of brings me to the question, is there maybe any certain kind of hope about how ADHD do you think is being talked to about now compared to maybe say 10, 20 years ago, and how it's understood in the modern age compared to when you were growing up?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and I think this applies across the board with almost anything in the mental health world these days, but absolutely applies to ADHD. I would say that we know a lot more about it. There's so many more resources these days. I mean, we're still coming along. And I think, just with anything, I think the people that have kind of the most resources, the most educated, are always going to be a little farther ahead, just in having access both to the research and being kind of the most informed, and then having the money to kind of pay the professionals to get their kids the best resources out there. And then, folks that are just super busy, struggling to make rent every month and get their kids to school, and they're in the school districts that have the least resources, are obviously going to probably know the least and have the least extra money to put towards getting their kids what they need, or have the least amount of experience and knowledge about how to navigate the school system and advocate and get what they need from the school system. And then that school system itself may have the least to give. So again, that's just kind of the sad reality of living in a first world capitalist country as it is. So but that doesn't mean don't try, and it doesn't mean that these districts still don't have to follow the laws of the state and can't be sued to provide what they can. So I'm not saying don't try at all. They do have resources. But yeah, so I would say, really, I'm trying to think back. I was high school 30 years ago or whatever. So I guess ADD, I think we knew what it was. I'm sure it was a thing if it existed. I'm just wondering if when I was your age, if somebody said, do you know what ADD is? What my answer would have been, how much I knew about it, but not much. But nowadays, any 16-year-old say what's ADD or what's ADHD, they're going to have a general working knowledge of what you're asking, and they probably could tell you what the medications are, what an IEP is. I just think it's much more common knowledge, and some people probably have a pretty good understanding. I think the cool thing about your generation is people are just more open now. There's so much less stigma about talking about. That's probably the biggest change in mental health that I've seen in the last 20 years. It's just the most encouraging is how much more open people are these days about, regardless of whether it's depression, anxiety, whether it's a learning difference. It just seems your generation, hopefully as a result of our generation, kind of starting to be open to going to therapy and being a little bit more open about talking about it and parenting you guys a little bit better than we were parented and talking about it. And I think it's been picked up more in music and TV and movies. It's just a little more mainstream. And I think now I think you guys kind of get it. Yeah, oh, wow, keeping this stuff in the shadows is really messing people up. Wait a minute, this is really toxic. You guys worked through this a bunch. We're really gonna make this mainstream now.
And I know that you mentioned that your wife has a huge background with ADHD, so I was wondering if you could maybe share that with the audience.
Just this last year, she's been on this journey, and it's been very exciting for her because it's answered so many questions for her about her own story. It's filled in so many blanks for her. She went to this school called Head Royce, which was $65,000 a year, private school in the East Bay. Talk about competitive or whatever. She didn't get diagnosed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so she had obviously parents that could afford that type of school, and went to this school that's supposedly, is today. And today they probably would catch it, but she's super bright and worked really hard and was still able to get good grades and go to a good school and all that, but missed it. Didn't get diagnosed until she was in her late 30s. And that kind of points out, right? Even someone like that in that type of environment wasn't able to be diagnosed 20 years ago. And and today our 2-year-old got an IEP. Because what's going on there? There's something different about this. They can't fit in this environment. We should probably get this kid assessed. Let's go to our school district. even though our kid's not even in preschool yet. I wonder, at what age can you get your kid assessed by your school district? Oh, you can do it now. Well, what are we waiting for? So yeah, to all the parents out there, you can get your kid assessed pretty early on. Yeah.
It's okay. Just listening to her story, I think, is it's very eye-opening, I think.
Yeah, very moving. Yeah, and also your son's experience. So thank you for sharing that, really.
I would just say, I know that you talked about, you're talking about the future. So would you say, in terms of the difference between maybe more about medication, more therapy based, how do you see the future of ADHD treatment changing itself?
A great question. So it's funny because I was talking with a client earlier today about the future of medication treatment and psychiatry, and he was saying, I wonder if they'll do a blood test where they can kind of take a blood test and figure out how to be more precise in how they do medications and assess for that, because it's kind of still a little bit barbaric how psychiatry works, because it's you go in and you tell your psychiatrist, here's how I'm feeling, and they kind of go, okay, well, based on what you're telling me, based on the symptoms, I think you have this. So and there's this range of that treat that thing. I'm not sure which one's the best one for you. I think it's this one. But here's the kicker. With any of these medications, it usually takes from a week to 3 weeks for us to really know. So even though you're feeling horrible and you're experiencing all these symptoms, we have to wait 2 weeks to find out if it's going to work or not. And then when you come back, you have to tell me how you think it's helping you. And then if it's not working, then I have to try and guess which one I think is going to be the second best option. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying psychiatrists aren't super smart, way smarter than me in a lot of ways. But this is the best method that we have, is a guess and check method a lot of the time in terms of psych meds. And so, but I think the direction it's going is with brain imaging. And I think, and I'm hoping before the end of my lifetime, hopefully definitely your guys, is through the brain imaging, they'll be able to we'll go in and they'll be able to do an MRI or something like that, maybe something more advanced than that, see what's going on in our brains, what parts of our brain are more active than others, maybe even something where they can kind of see neurotransmitter activity. We only have so many different types of neurotransmitters in our brains, and they kind of see where the neurotransmitters are and which ones we have more and less of, and they're able to kind of spit out something that says, okay, this person's brain is imbalanced in these neurotransmitters in these parts of the brain, therefore they should take this many milligrams of this medication, or we need to stimulate the brain here and here, rather than, okay, you're depressed, that means you're deficient in these neurotransmitters. Exactly by how much, exactly in what ways, we don't know for sure, but we're hoping these meds do the job. So that's why it's kind of crazy that in 2025 we're still in kind of a guess and check system in terms of how we deal with mental health with our medications in a lot of cases. So fingers crossed that technology will be here sooner than later.
No, I think it's also quite scary, as you mentioned before, that the guess and check, what happens if they give the wrong medication and the patient has a really bad reaction to it, or just all these crazy stories. So I think it's very good that you mentioned that, because I do think while the guess and check method, it's worked so far for all these years.
It's the best there is available, but
it could be better.
Yeah, it's the best thing that we have to offer, so I don't blame the psychiatrists for using it. They're doing the best they can with what they have. But man, won't it be great when we have better tools? It's nobody's fault. It's just kind of, when you take a step back and think about in other types of in other areas of the medical field, right? We have such amazingly precise ways of diagnosing and assessing. Surgeons aren't guessing and checking. You know what I mean? Some of the MRI technology or the blood, the way we test blood. I mean, the absolutely precise ways a lot of doctors have to do their jobs compared to psychiatrists is it's not really fair for the psychiatrists, but anyway, I'm saying. Yeah, and I think it's with the ADHD meds, it can be very dangerous, and it can lead to a lot of addiction issues down the line. And there's a huge comorbidity between ADHD and addiction, for both the reason that the exposure to highly addictive stimulants at a young age, and the huge shame component to being to the messaging you get of being different and less than, etc. In school can lead to a lot of self-medicating, which then leads to substance abuse issues.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think it was fascinating when you brought up how we can use brain imaging, honestly, to potentially use it for diagnoses. That kind of brings us to the end of our questions. We just kind of wanted, as a final note, we typically like to ask just sort of for a piece of advice or like a call to action based question. What would you say, or what would you want a teen who's now and maybe struggling with ADHD to hear?
Oh man, you're not alone. It's the most important thing. Don't be scared to talk to people in your life about what's going on with you. Doesn't mean talk to everyone, because some people do suck. But find some people that care and tell them what you're going through, because you'd be surprised how many people understand. You really will be surprised in life that when you start opening up and telling people what you're feeling, what a gift you're giving them, because you will just be surprised how often they go, "Oh my God, me too," and they'll share some example of something they've been dealing with that they couldn't tell anyone about. And that connection between two humans is sometimes the best medicine you'll ever take.
Well, again, Dr. Kirsch, we want to thank you so much for being able to spend this time with us, and thank you again for saying yes to our email. And I think Anoushka and I, we've learned so much from this experience. I think it's very eye-opening, not just to hear from another peer, but also someone, especially as you've been a teacher and you now are also a therapist, and also as a parent, you get to see all these different outlets on how ADHD really can affect children of all ages.
Yeah, this is cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the notes and just sort of I think more importantly, we wanted to sort of understand the different aspects of ADHD and just kind of shift away from the typical narrative that people think about how it's presented in the media and misconceptions. So this was fantastic.
ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is something that 1 in 7 teenagers struggle with. But like Dr. Kirsch said, life isn't about test scores, perfection, or merit. Success takes many forms, and what matters most is seeing yourself as a human being. Because at the end of the day, you are worthy, capable, a friend, a sibling, and you are loved. Having ADHD can look different for everyone, and it may feel like a setback at times. But whether you have it or not, there are always ways to recover and refocus. Maybe by taking a deep breath, finding unique strategies to help you concentrate, and most of all, forgiving yourself. It's easy to feel like ADHD is a wall standing up in your way. But if you can use that wall to climb higher, to see things from a new perspective, then every struggle, every challenge becomes a part of the view.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The People We Meet. Stay tuned for more content about teen experiences and authentic conversations. Till next time.